All right, guys, I am so sorry about the technical difficulties that I've experienced. I'm not great with computers. I eventually got it, obviously, but by the time I realized what it was, so many other things had come up that I just hadn't had time to finish this section out. I do really apologize. I'm going to try really hard to get you guys to make up for lost time, essentially, because I do apologize for making you guys wait just to finish up this last section. I apologize with the difficulties in the last video of this series. Work with me. I apologize. It's the blind leading the blind over here. So we're going to finish up our section. We were really close towards the end there, so this shouldn't be too long. We're finishing our section in the social sciences, and then we're moving on to the dual sciences, so that'll be fun. Okay, so we'll just pick up where we left off. This double-edged problem of the public leads to two general ascertainments which Romano Guardini has formulated lapidarily. That word's gone out of fashion. Quote, in any event, man today does not experience the world as a protective enclosure, unquote. This is the contemporary situation in all its severity. Man is no longer protected and secure. The situation elicits two reactions. The most prevalent is that we feel pushed out, helpless, unprotected, and thrown, i.e. Heidegger. The second is that we recognize the open world and sustain it through openness. So it's very interesting what Gebser's doing here, because he never comes out and says it, I don't think, but if you read between the lines, he's being paradoxical. Because on one hand, he's saying, by emphasizing the spiritual aspect of our world so much, he is saying to a certain extent it is closed. There is a spiritual principle, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if limit is the right word, but it did get this ball rolling, and it does seem to be pretty powerful. It's far more powerful than us as pure humans, even though pretending that we're divorced from this thing somehow. Nonetheless, it is closed to an extent, but at the same time, he's saying open, we should sustain this openness. This openness is not necessarily a bad thing, and we should accept it, work with it, and reap the benefits that it produces. Great. So paradoxically, the world is both open and closed simultaneously. I think it's very cool because he said here, in any event, man today does not experience the world as a protective enclosure. Now, what does that sound like? A protective enclosure? That sounds to me like the cave, the magical cave, this idea that we all belong inside the spiritual cave, bubble, whatever you want to call it. And it's protective, it's spiritual, and it encloses us, and it is sort of the spiritual and earthly bubble that we live in. Well, of course, that space has been completely broken apart, not necessarily by the openness of the integral structure, but honestly, more by the openness of the mental structure, because, of course, the space that was enclosed and circular was a pseudo space. It wasn't really space, right? Space is open. Space is we can completely break through, right? And we see this all the time, of course. This is one of my main points in the first video of this entire series. Around the Renaissance, we found the discovery of space. We had the Euclidean, of course, geometry. We had the Copernican revolution. We had perspectivity by Da Vinci. We had perspectivity in art. We had the sciences, of course, the scientific revolution. And we had Columbus's discovery of America. So I think that's pretty cool, the way Gebser does that. Now, it's weird. He doesn't really say that. And it's almost interesting to think, well, if space is so open, then why is it integral consciousness that needed this sort of openness? Now, we know why, right? Because it's because space, in a way, it closes at the same time. Everything spatial has limits, so it's open to a limitation. But integral consciousness is no, this limitation, it might be true in certain extents, but only because you're employing it where there is space, right? There's a certain openness now with integral consciousness. Sorry, I'll keep going. To what extent Western man tends toward this openness, at first justifiably felt to be a loss, is obvious from J.A. Schumpeter's remarks. Listen to this. This is pretty cool. He notes the, quote, loss of domesticity, unquote, recognizable in the flight toward the public. Flight from the home into restaurants, clubs, apartment houses, and hotel apartments. Schumpeter subjects this phenomenon to an instructive sociological analysis. The flight, more obvious in the United States than in Europe, is not only a rejection of intimacy, but a deeper sociological restructuration, a lessening of rigidity. So I almost don't, does that need to be explained? The more people move from their house and into the public, into the collective, that is to say, the more people transcend the boxed-in individual that the rationalist world created. Now we're trying to reintegrate that individual into the collective, just as the molecule, of course, is a part in a whole simultaneously, just as you're a part in a whole simultaneously. Well, now we're trying to reintegrate the private, the individual who is static, isolated, and separated from each other, is now being reintegrated into the public, which is a sort of little microcosm of what's happening, of course, more broadly with integral consciousness. This is revealed by a parallel phenomenon. Architecture may be considered as the artistic, expression of sociology. With this in mind, it is not irrelevant to note that for the last 30 years, architecture has demonstrated a tendency toward greater openness. We will be discussing that later on, do not worry. The reason I said boxed in, because it reminded me of the section on architecture that we'll get to in a little bit. It's very good. It's very, if you want to think about, just to give you a little spoiler, if you want to think of like a nice little symbolic representation of integral consciousness, think about what, from an architectural perspective, thinking about changing from brick to glass, think about what that does for a second. Think about how the glass allows the external and the internal to be co-present. And think about that. The sociological assertions, all of which are inceptions of an open perception of the world, may be evaluated in our view as indications of a de-rigidification and hence of the emergent irrationality of man. Alfred Weber, who has demonstrated the end of the currently attained intellectual rationalistic level of consciousness, points implicitly to the eruption of irrationality. End of the currently. Interesting. Alfred Weber expressly states, quote, "Neither the Euclidean spatial conception nor the concomitant quantitative conception of time that man has developed can actually encompass the world in its being and becoming. Both are merely means of orientation whose limits are immediately clear." Bars. Now, of course, we know the Euclidean spatial. We know why that was wrong, of course. Absolute backdrop, right? That's bullshit. Absolute space, absolute time, everything's equal. It's like a flat desert plain. No, it's curved space. Now, what does it curve into? A sphere, the symbol for integral consciousness. Both fundamental categories, the three-dimensional conception of space as well as the quantitative conception of time, are merely human categories inadequate to encompass the spiritual world based. Moreover, the basic principle of intellectualistic causality appears to fail. The newest claims of physics, even where still content with mathematical formulations of quantity, motion, and change in inanimate space and time, show that, observed more closely, such an approach within the previous intellectual formal language of Euclidean space, time, and causality is inadequate. It is necessary to construct an appropriate formal language and specific concepts which exclude causality and the old space-time conceptions in order to reach a more exact description of the world processes by an artificial, mathematical, four-dimensional construction. Four-dimensional construction unifying space and time. My God, can we get that's a little bit of a run-on sentence, Weber. This means, in truth, the end of all-encompassing inventory of the world via everyday intellectualistic categories. The end of codification of inanimate nature. With respect to animate nature, vitalism has long since shown that its secrets are not amenable to explanation and opinions based on the notion of external cause and effect. Rather, we must assume intellectuality, inaccessible, immanent, and transcendent powers of volition and formation in order to gain some comprehension of what has come here into being and is capable of building and rebuilding itself anew. My goodness! Whew! So that's just a big fancy way of saying the mental structure is gone. Like, I don't know why Gebser even quoted. I don't even know why I read that. Okay. Today, no one assumes that the intellectual formal categories, i.e. rational conceptions, formulations, and representations, which are inadequate for explaining being and becoming, could say anything about imperatives, about the essence and emergence of values as rules for our actions, or about the meaning of the world. All this is beyond the ken of an intellect developed for practical human purposes. The intellect, therefore, as the ultimate authority, has been banished not only from the religious, but also from the philosophical metaphysical sphere. Once again, a revolutionary act, I would say so. While the Eastern world conception and meaning remained magical, as in China, or attained a magical, mythical, metaphysical form of comprehension, as in India, it has in the West come to rest in a plane of intellectualism through the influence of the intellectualistic, mental, rational philosophy of the Greeks. Hold on. While the Eastern world conception and meaning. Okay. This plane is today crumbling. This collapse has nearly circumscribed the limits of intellectualism and has revealed the possibility of a metacausal and extra-spatio-temporal world comprehension. So that Gebser identifies as the beginning of the eruption of a rationality of integral consciousness. We could be a little more succinct. Okay. All right, let's see. All right, yeah, we'll skip ahead a little bit. Oh, this is going to be a hard one to pronounce. Le Comte de Nouet. Lecomte. Lecomte, maybe. De, D-U. Now, here's the problem. N-O-U-Y, but the U has two little dots over it. I have no idea. Le Comte de Nouet. 2 points implicitly to space-time freedom. Quote. So now we're talking about space-time freedom. We'll talk about that for a second after this is done. Man will at last be able to think universally. His mechanical intelligence has come to the rescue of his moral intuition. He has gained centuries by eliminating space and time, which separated him from the suffering of his brother and erected isolating barriers around him. Interesting. And, we're going to talk about that. Elimination, or the suppression of space-time by this conscious process, is synonymous with the possible acquisition of the acronym, space-time freedom. Since space-time freedom is neither a being in nor being in opposition to, this is Gebser, by the way, but an openness, a diaphaneity, then it is evident that the new mode of realization is neither an identification nor control of objects. It is not achievable by some perspectival conception and can only be effected in a perspectival, truth-sustaining based. Perhaps Jose Ortega y Gasset had this mode of realization in mind in his address, Truth as Man's Accord with Himself. In any case, Lecomte de Nouet has established it on the basis of his research in sociology and neurobiology. Quote, man with his present brain does not represent the end of evolution, but only an intermediary stage between the past, heavily weighted down with memories of the beast, and the future, rich in higher promise, such as human destiny. Almost kind of reminds me of Marxism a little bit. The idea that the past, taken from this perspective, that the past exploitation of workers by capitalists is so great and so, not in a good way, not an improving way, but so sustaining and so impacting, and the future promises are so much higher, these two combine or integrate to create the drive for Marxism. Okay, this is Gebser now. This conception has been shared recently by Hugo Spatz, who, on the basis of his brain research, regards the developmental possibility of one part of the cortex, the basal neocortex, as certain. These assertions, relating to the already established unfolding in the brain that, as he points out, might have occurred mutationally, afford proof for our structurally discovered mutations of consciousness. Let's repeat that. On the basis of his brain research, regards the developmental possibility of one part of the cortex, the basal neocortex, as certain. These assertions relating to the already established unfolding in the brain that, as he points out, might have occurred mutationally, afford proof of our structurally discovered mutation of consciousness. This coincidence of findings, originating in sociological research, further supported by neurobiological, ethnological, and prehistorical evidence, with our clearly demonstrated unfoldings of consciousness structures via mutations, is not just significant in itself. It is also important in regard to the mode of realization of the universal consciousness, as Lecomte de Nouet calls it, which we have designated as the integral, mankind open consciousness. This realization form is direct perception. It is necessarily the brain, quote, it is necessarily the brain made up of cells which evolves, but this organ has reached a stage where its physicochemical and biological activity manifests itself on a different plane through psychological phenomena which are perceived directly. Let's repeat that. It is necessarily the brain, made up of cells, which evolves. But this organ has reached a different stage where its physico-chemical and biological activity manifests itself on a different plane through psychological phenomena which are perceived directly. Their existence coincides with our perception of them without intermediary mechanism. So these last two paragraphs are a fancy way of saying that there is neurological evidence supporting the existence of immeasurable, invisible consciousness structures, which in turn prove the complementary nature between the non-physical and the physical. Remember, all this neurobiological stuff, obviously it's very small, but it is spatial at the end of the day. We can measure these things, which is a good thing. But the consciousness structures are invisible in alignment with the irrational way of thinking and perceiving, I should say. And these two work together. They're complements, just as the world is complement, just as estimate of knowledge is a complement to experiential knowledge, just as man and world are complements, just as man and women, men and women are complements, all this stuff. So yes, it is true, as the rationalists say. By the way, when a rationalist tells you that there's no empirical evidence for the consciousness structures, one, inform them that they've missed the point entirely. They have missed the point entirely. This is a irrational, phenomenological work that operates on resonance and correspondence to reality and resonance. It's got nothing to do with empirical measurement. You're missing the point entirely. The entire point is to tell you that way of perceiving is yesterday's news. So when someone tells you that, you remind them that they're missing the point and you're just missing it. Two, you point them to this and say, this is not the consciousness structure itself, but this is physical evidence that seems to have unfolded in the exact same correspondence, in the exact same way that these structures have also unfolded. So I don't know what to say. So let's talk about space-time freedom for a second. So we know what time freedom means. Time freedom means to be released from the permanent clutches, if you will, of linear, causal, spatial, quantitative time, the rational time, clock time, the calendar, one after the other, that kind of thing. Now we have all sorts of different time. We have time as not only as a quantity, but time as a quality. We have time as procedural unfolding. We have time, psychic temporicity, time as an intensity combined with time as a quality. So there's a quality charging every moment, and the psyche experiences and feels that quality. It's not just some abstract thing. We have music. We have rhythm. We have meter. We have biological time, chronogeneity. We have all this stuff, right? We have a space-time unity. We have chronogeneity. We have all these different things. So that's time freedom. But of course, we know it's not space and time. It's space-time. So if you have time freedom, you must necessarily have space freedom as well. Now, what does space freedom mean? Does space freedom mean that... Does it conform to the rational conception in which you are quite literally free from anything that affects you in the world? So I guess the idea would be if I just kind of walk out in the highway and decide that I could just run into a car going at 60 miles per hour, that car is going to go flying out of the air and I'm just going to be fine. That's not what it means. But what it does mean is by recognizing the temporal limits of all spatial things and recognizing the fact that the past and the future shape the present moment, you have a certain degree of freedom. Not in the sense you're free from biological death or, if I come punch you in the face, that's not going to hurt you. Well, I'm not very strong, so maybe it won't. But you know what I mean. Not in that sense, but a certain freedom from enslavement to the negative aspects of the present moment that threaten to overwhelm you. That's what I mean. Now, this does range on a scale, because on one hand, you have space freedom, knowing that I'm at work, it's just really busy right now, but you know what? This will end, no matter what. We know this will end, and I know that past experiences with this kind of situation hurt me. I know that my future conception of wanting to go home really bad is hurting me right now, so all I have to do is consciously work on that, and now I have the space freedom to meet this challenge much more respectably and much more likely to produce efficient outcomes. Now, that's on one end, right? That's relatively easy. And then on the other hand, you have like the Jews and the Holocaust. Yeah, in a way, technically it would have come to an end eventually, but man, that's that's going to be really tough. So there's a qualitative degree here. There's a qualitative variance here. But that's at least how I understand space-time freedom. So if you have a different understanding, please let me know. I'll see you guys in the next video. I'll try to get that to you as soon as possible. And I love you guys. Sorry again about the technical difficulties. Shouldn't be a problem from here on out, but we'll see. Love you guys.